Hi everyone. My paper talks about the connections between Saudiization and higher education in Saudi Arabia. The paper aims to analyze the interaction of Saudi female higher education, Saudiization, which I'll talk about in a bit, and women migration into Saudi Arabia. With recent attempts to Saudiization and at the same time the government's support of higher female education and their participation in the private sector, I look into how these two have been increasing the demand for domestic workers in the country and at the same time changing Saudi's highly gendered migrant worker recruitment system, if you will. Saudi Arabia has a unique workforce, which is highly dependent on migrant labor. The start of a major increase for migration workers coming into Saudi began after the oil boom in 1973. Since then, Saudi Arabia has increasingly become dependent on migrant labor. However, due to growing unemployment among Saudi nationals, in the last few decades, as well as the decline in oil reserves and the impact a big public sector had on the government, the Saudi Arabian government has been shifting the focus to other solutions. And what are all these solutions? Saudiization. The solution the kingdom has been shifting toward is a mandate termed as Saudiization, and this is the process by which migrant workers are replaced by Saudi citizens in the job market. This reform of the workforce was formally launched in the 90s, but has been a debated issue in society and over the years has been reformed. However, it has not been well received in the business field, especially in the private sector. In the years between 2000 and 2004, the government made further plans and targets like ensuring the Saudis occupied 25% of private sector jobs by 2004. Um, with that said, in jobs dominated by men, migration has decreased. The International Labor Organization reports that um, male foreign labor force in Saudi has quite significantly decreased from 94.8% in 1974 to 63.8% in 2000. Um, I'm assuming that the number has decreased as well in the last few years, but I have not been able to find recent number recent numbers yet. So no data is data. Um, the number of migrant workers coming into the country for labor continues to increase, though, in other sections, most specifically the percentage of women coming into the kingdom to work. A report from the ILO again states that the estimated number of women migrants in Saudi has increased from over 100,000 to in 1965 to about 2 million in 2 million in 1990. Um, with the goal to improve on Saudiization, the government has intensified the focus on higher post secondary school education for females. In the 1960s, it supported the education of women, thus creating new opportunities in commerce, health, and social service for women. Between 1975 and 2005, the percentage of Saudi women receiving their education increased from 33% to 48%. Now let's look at the table. And you can see that on the first row, youth female literacy rate, age 15 to 24, was 93.7 in 2000 and increased to 96.2 in 2008. But the most drastic change was adult female age 15 and above, that is past 24 years old. And in 1992, it was 57.27. And in 2008, it went up to 80.2%. Quite a significant change. So, what are all these women that are coming into Saudi doing? Current research by Human Rights Watch suggests that an increasingly large number of women and girls are migrating to Middle Eastern countries for unskilled jobs, most often domestic work. The ILO estimated in 2013 that Saudi Arabia employs the largest number of domestic workers. Human Rights Watch says, though, that with this comes issues like forced labor, overworking, and trafficking. From 1975 to 2000, female laborers have increased from 5.1 to 3.36 0.2%. And most of these women from Asia come from Asian countries like Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, and most recently African countries like Ethiopia and Kenya. And by now, number of women migrants has multiplied 5 to 7 times they used to be. How is Saudi recruiting all these workers? I chose to survey one country to, or looking to one country to simplify the sending to receiving countries' mutual relationship and how this migration happens. In both countries, direct socialization of women to do certain jobs enforces the gendering and also predisposes women to go ahead and take on these jobs. In the case of the Indonesian domestic workers, recruitment of workers in general from the state to Saudi began in 1983. Since then, migration of those leaving has continued to increase. And programs and institutions are created in Indonesia to promote sending of women into Saudi and furthered the work by creating training centers for women specifically in domestic work. Indonesia's reinforced ideologies in domesticating women and enforcing women's roles as caretakers causes many women to leave their families behind in search of labor in Saudi, leading to a new order which promotes both domestic and transnational roles for women. So, what um, effects does this have on domestic workers? The social construct gendering of labeling domestic services as only women's work has contributed to the vulnerability and exploitation of women experience while working in Saudi. According to the World Bank, many women are faced with numerous abuses, not only by their employer but also individuals they encounter during the recruitment process. Gender based violence doesn't just begin where the women are sent in as migrants. The Indonesian government implemented a number of stringent rules and a long process to those willing to migrate as laborers, and the complexity and length of the process led many to resort to seeking other means, such as working with corrupt government officials. As a result, women experience vulnerabilities, and at the same time, there's a huge need for brokers, and so these women end up facing sexual abuse, harassment, and rape. Over the phone, I interviewed a Kenyan woman working in Saudi as a domestic worker with many cases of exploitation. Fortunately, she expressed to me that her employees treat her well and she plans to continue working there. However, stringent and divisive rules, Saudi laws isolate domestic workers and discourages them from seeking help or being vocal in times of abuse. How is this affecting Saudi women, though? The worker I interviewed told me that the woman and her family went to work as a teacher almost as soon as she had been hired. Because of the help they get from migrant domestic workers, women are able to physically be mobile and now have more freedom from their fathers and husband, and since job opportunities have opened up for them. According to a study done in 1991, only 4.4 to 5% of women worked in Saudi. This is the lowest in the world. And so access to higher education and Saudiization has afforded women jobs in fields such as architecture, journalism, and even advertising. This percentage is bound to increase. However, these opportunities with no simultaneous shifts in gender norms regarding men doing housework have an influence on an increased reliance on domestic workers to assist professional women with their unchanged household roles. Oh yeah, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed it.